Morning. We are in the book of Deuteronomy, and we're working through that, and what we have seen is that it is a story of God's people on the move, as God has taken his people out of Egypt and brought them through the wilderness. They have wandered in the desert for 40 years, and they are now moving into the promised land and going that way, and as they do, they are finding blessing, and we see that what has gone on here is that one generation, the generation that was taken out of Egypt, has died, and there is a new generation. And I think about this, how it talks about in Lamentations, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. They are new to every generation. They are new to us. They are new to us every single day. And so this is what happens in God's mercy and his love and all of what he does. He is blessing constantly, and he is blessing every single generation in their way. And even those that were in that exile in the desert, and I'm calling it an exile, basically they were wandering. In that wandering, they were even blessed in all of that. And so we see that God, in his mercy, it is new every single day, and they are blessed in what is going on. So we are taking a look at Deuteronomy chapter 3. I'm not going to read everything that is going on here. Again, what we have is we have a lot of historical information here about what is going on and how it's going on, and we find that what Moses has done, he has defeated the king of Sihon and the king of he's the king of Heshbon and the king of Bashan, Sihon and Og. And they are moving into position so that they are going to enter into the promised land, which is not going to happen until we get to the book of Joshua. Well, this is what we have here in Deuteronomy. So we have this division, and we have the land that they are taking over, and we have the land that is given to the Reubenites, and we have all of this going on, and there's all this information about all of this and about what is going on. Gilead is one of the cities that they have taken, in which we know about the balm in Gilead. All these things are happening. So as we see his blessing and we see what God is doing, I want us to continue and take a look at exactly what is going on here, because what we have here is God always wants to give his people more. And it's amazing, you know, we talk about the manifold blessings, or we talk about the many blessings that God has given us. And as we think about those things and about what God has given us, we can recognize, if we are really counting our blessings, if we are really looking at things, we have been given a lot more than we can possibly have ever imagined. We can be thankful for what we have. I want us to see right here at the beginning that Heshbon and Bashan were not part of the original plan. In fact, if we take a look at Numbers chapter 24, what we see is that the eastern border of Israel was to be the Jordan River, which is the border right now of the nation-state of Israel. Jordan is on the other side. The nation of Jordan is on the other side. But Israel was given everything to the west of the Jordan River. That is something that we see. But what we have here is that there is this giving of other land. And so we see, for example, in 2, and we looked at this a bit last week, we see in chapter 2, 26 through 30, we have Moses, who is sending messengers to Sihon, king of Heshbon, offering peace and saying, "Let us pass through your country. We will stay on the main road. We will not turn aside to the right or the left. Sell us food to eat and water to drink for their price in silver. Only let us pass through on foot, as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir and the Moabites who live in Ar did for us, until we cross the Jordan into the land the Lord our God is giving us." But Sihon, the king of Heshbon, refused to let us pass through. And this is the key part. "For the Lord your God had made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate in order to give him into your hands, as he has now done." And so we see that he defeats Sihon, the king of Heshbon. And then we see that he also defeats Og, the king of Bashan. And so what's going on here is God is always looking to see how in the world he can bless his people more. And we talked about the war situation. We talked about how all that plays out. The Old Testament has got a lot of difficult things that we're not going to necessarily understand or explain. But what we see here is that God is looking to give his people more at all times. And what's more, what he is doing is he is offering them security and shelter in their wake. as we take a look at the land that he's giving the Israelites on the eastern side of the Jordan River. He talks in verse 15. We're going to pick up in 15. It says, "And I gave Gilead to Machir, but to the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave the territory extending from Gilead down to the Arnon Gorge, the middle of the gorge being their border, and out of the Jabbok River, which is the border of the Ammonites. Its western border was the Jordan in the Arabah, from Kinnereth to the sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, below the slopes of Pisgah. I commanded you at that time, the Lord your God has given you this land to take possession of it, but all your able-bodied men," okay, you realize that they right now are on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and he's saying, but all of your able-bodied men, armed for battle, must cross over ahead of your brothers, the Israelites. So basically, when we're taking a look at the Reubenites, this is going to be your land. But you're not going to stay here in your land while your brothers are going over into Canaan and taking possession of that. You are part of the plan to go ahead and take possession of that land too. You're not just going to sit here now and let the others take care of it. You are part of that plan. I want you to be part of that. Okay, that's fine. But what's going on here? It says, I want you to do this. However, your wives, your children, and your livestock, I know you have much livestock, may stay in the towns I have given you until the Lord gives the rest of your brothers as he is to you. And they too have taken over the land that the Lord your God is giving them across the Jordan. After that, each of you may go back to the possession I have given you. Now, I want you to think about this. This is a wandering group of people. They have been wandering in the desert for 40 years. Now, they come against Sihon, and they come against Og, and they go to war. And they fight. And fighting is war. It's tough. And then God says, okay, now I want the fighting force to go into the rest of the land, and I want your wives and your children and your livestock to stay over here in the towns that I've given you. Now, I want you to understand what's going on here is, you're living in towns you didn't build. And this is part of the promise. You're going to live in towns that you didn't build. You're going to live in houses you didn't build. You're going to live in places that you didn't work for. There are going to be gardens, there are going to be fields, there are going to be plowed fields, there's going to be vineyards, there's going to be all of that. You didn't work for it. And so you're just moving in. Oh, this is nice. I like this. I'm taking this one. And this is God blessing his people in this process. But then what's going to happen is all the men are going to go over to fight. And the women and the children and the livestock, they're going to be over here in this area alone. And everything is going to be okay. Peace and security in their wake. I think about what Jesus said to his disciples. He said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I don't give it to you as the world gives it to you. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. This is that John 14:27 passage. Today in our Bible class, Lester was talking about all the things that we might face in our lives that might be difficult. And what we have here going on here is the people were faithful in the book of Acts towards spreading the gospel, and they had some persecution. But through all that persecution, God is seeing them through. Even Stephen, who is stoned, what is his view? He sees heaven opened up, and God, in all of his glory, and Jesus on the right hand. We know where he's going. There is security in the wake of the people going in the direction that they are supposed to go in. God says in this, and I think that it is interesting here because this is what is going on. The Lord your God has given you possession of the land, okay? This is what you're going to do. I know you have much livestock. And what's going on in here, it's almost like a reminder of the wealth they have been given. We got to realize, where has all this wealth come from? Where is all this developed? Well, it's in the 40 years of wandering in the desert. Their herds, their flocks, all of that have prospered. They have multiplied in children. They have not decreased in number, they have increased in number. And so what is going on here is God, in his abundance, in his grace, in his keeping of his side of the covenant, has blessed them with an awful lot. And I think that what we see here is when we are faithful, there is no limit to what God does. And we can take a look at that in Ephesians 3:20 passage. That is a very famous passage. Maybe you know exactly what I'm going to say because we go there a lot. It's one of those passages that I think is so powerful that we need to have it all over the place. And what it says here in Ephesians chapter 3:20, now to him who was able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. And so we have this, and we have this idea that what is going on here is we've got ideas about what we want to do. We have ideas about what we want to accomplish, and we go, oh, I hope we can meet those goals. Oh, I hope that God blesses us. Oh, I hope we go this far. What we find is that God gives us immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. I can imagine just 8 months ago, a year ago, we were sitting here thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this mortgage? What are we going to do about our debts? And we have people in the congregation who worked hard to figure out how we can take care of this. And we paid off that debt. Immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. If we take a look at that Luke 6 passage, it's a passage that often gets used in terms of giving. I've heard so many giving sermons on this particular passage in Luke 6. And what it's saying here in verses 37 through 38, it says this. It says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now what we have here is we have this generosity, and we can talk about this in terms of giving and all this, but what we really have here in a lot of, and there was a lot of passages that talk about that. But what we really have here is this entire context of being gracious to one another. Of being giving and forgiving to one another, of looking out for one another. And what we have here is that God, when we do these things, he blesses us with even more. We are given more grace in our lives. We are given more forgiveness in our lives. It's amazing to me as I take a look at this whole judgment passage. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? This is verse 41. How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You know, if you want to be judged, go to someone and tell them all the things that they're doing wrong. Point blank, just start there. Now, I believe that the Bible teaches that we need to be making sure that we are looking out for one another and taking care of one another and pointing out when we are doing wrong. But I'm also mindful of my own sinfulness. I'm also mindful of my own shortcomings. And so when I go to a brother or sister and say, hey, you know what, we might want to... It's also, hey, you know what? I know I've got some things I need to be working on. I appreciate what you're doing for me, and I appreciate the prayers that you give me, and I appreciate all that. That's the kind of relationship we have. And then we can talk about the speck in your brother's eye. Then we can do that. When we take a look at things and we are willing to go ahead and do it in God's way, what we find is that God blesses us in ways that we can't even fathom. We end up with incredible blessing. I've often said that a person can't forgive unless they have felt forgiveness. In Jesus Christ, the depth of God's forgiveness is incredibly deep. And so we can pass that on. We can be conduits of God's grace to our brothers and sisters. Okay, now what we have going on, it changes up. I'm going into chapter 3. I'm going on to this next passage. What I want to talk about now here is this part about Moses and what we're dealing with in this particular section. Is we're dealing with Deuteronomy chapter 3:21 through the end of this chapter. And what we've got here going on here is Moses is the only leader that these people had ever known. They remember how Moses led their parents out of Egypt with God doing the work. So Moses has been the one who has been the representative on Sinai. Moses has been the one that went up onto the mountain and got the Ten Commandments. Moses is the one who has led them through the desert. Moses is the one who has told them, hey, look, we got to keep our faith. We got to realize that God is taking care of us with manna and quail. We got to realize that He will not leave us in a place where we will not have water. We got to realize that He's doing all of this. And we also realize that Moses did mess up. He got impatient with the people, which is amazing. He got impatient with people, and instead of speaking to the rock to get the water, he struck the rock, and God said, that was not what I told you to do. And so Moses is not going into the promised land. And so what we have here is we have this situation with Moses, and he's not able to go. And we take a look at verse 23 through 27, and then we find that Moses is pleading with God. He has been wandering in the desert. He has taken the people out of Egypt. He has done all these things. And he says, at that time I pleaded with the Lord, O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven and earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon. He wants to see it. He's desirous of seeing. He's wanting to go into that land. I mean, this is what he was promised. They should have gone in 40 years ago. And he's wandered in the desert with all these people. And he can't go in. And God says, no, you're not going to. And he says this, but because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, the Lord said. Do not speak to me any more about this matter. Now what you're going to be able to do is go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you are not going to cross the Jordan. So that's not going to happen. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see. So we stayed in the valley near Beth Peor. And so what we've got here going on here is that he's not going to go. And I think about so many different things where God has said, okay, you know what? Your time and your place and your function is this. You're not going any further. And I think about, I'm going to bring up a strange example. This has nothing to do with God or anything like that, but I've always been struck that George Washington died in December of 1799. Okay? So he never saw the 1800s. And by all accounts, he probably was just killed outright by his doctors because it just kept on bleeding him. He went and there were 3 doctors who went in, and every single doctor said, I don't know what that other doctor did, but I tell you what we're going to do, we're going to bleed you. And the other doctor said, no, I don't know what that other doctor did, but we're going to bleed you. And before long, he didn't have any blood in him. And he died, and he succumbed to his injuries. And I'm thinking about all this, and thinking about all of this, and what historians say is, he was a man of the 18th century, and the 1800s being the 19th century, we're going into a different era, and how fitting it was that Washington didn't see that. Tragedy, whatever. When I think of David and Solomon, and David says, Lord, I'm living in this beautiful palace that you've allowed me to build in Jerusalem, and now I want to build you a temple. And Nathan the prophet says, hey, that's a good thing. And then he comes back to David and he said, no, God spoke to me. And he said, you're not going to be the one to do it. Your son Solomon is going to be the one to do it. I am happy that you've got this in your mind, but your age and your time and your purposes are going to end, and now Solomon's going to do this. And I think that it is the same with Moses. We are entering a different era. We are coming with a new generation. And that generation is going to have to pick up. That generation is going to have to learn to live without you. That generation is going to have to see that it's me doing it, not you. And so, Moses, you're not going to go in. And Moses looks to the future. And we have this entire thing where God says, I want you to commission him, I want you to encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead the people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see. I tell you what, one of the hardest things about leading, one of the hardest things about being a leader is being able to let go and pass that torch on to the next generation, that baton on to the next generation, whatever metaphor you want to use. Being able to do that. But leaders need to do that. Leaders need to be looking at that. And so what we see here in verse 21 which is a little bit ahead. It says, "At that time I commanded Joshua, you have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you." And so he's preparing Joshua, and he's saying, okay, guess what? I'm not going to be with you anymore. You saw what God can do. Go and do it. And we can think that leadership, okay, leadership is a hard thing to be in. Leadership is a hard position to be in, but you know what? We're all leading someone. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're an uncle. Maybe you're an aunt. Maybe you've got somebody that you are impacting in any number of ways. And our goal, our job as people who are in those positions, whatever those positions are, is to go ahead and encourage younger generations and say, look, this is how God has brought me through life. And I'm not going to be here to do it for you all the time. I'm not going to be the one to point it out all the time. You've got to make sure that you're carrying it on and moving it on and going on. And you may do it, and you may encounter things that I've never had to encounter before. I'm not going to be there to figure that out. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. And leaders are always looking, and we've talked about this even earlier in Deuteronomy. Leaders are always looking to the future. What about North Penn? I believe our best days are ahead of us. I really do. But it's a part of saying, okay, now let's get people and let's get them ready to move. Let's get our younger generations to move. Let's get our younger ones to move. Let's get on, because we're not going to be here forever. And young ones, as you step in and you do what you're needing to do by being faithful and getting that faith strong and moving, the thing is, you also need to be looking. And it's not too soon to do that. If you're in high school, look to the junior high. If you're in junior high, look to the elementary. Elementary, they're going to have to think about it a bit. But it's important. It's incredibly, incredibly important. I remember, and now I'm waxing an elephant, as one of my professors used to say, wax elephant, I'm waxing an elephant. One of the things that I realized early on, like in my late 20s, when I went to camp and I was working at summer camp and all this, I realized, guess what? I'm not of that younger generation anymore. And I don't feel very old, but I'm not of that younger generation anymore. But I've got to instill within these teenagers a desire to follow God and do what they need to do. And they need to instill it within the younger generations. We're constantly preparing those who are younger to be older in the faith so that they can do the same. And if they see us doing it, they too will do it. If they see us focusing only on ourselves, then they too will only focus on themselves. And so we must instill this within our younger generation. I'm getting off that soapbox. Pressing ahead. What we have in all of what is going on here is we have this pressing ahead. We have this faith in action. This generation will not hesitate. What we see them doing in Deuteronomy, what we see them doing in Joshua, what we see them doing is they are moving and they are going and they are doing it with all sorts of enthusiasm. And so we too must also realize that this is part and parcel of what we should be about. And as we talk about their faithful action and their faithful ways and doing what needs to be doing, I know I've got 3 points up there, but I'm going to kind of make kind of a salad out of it and make it to where it's all kind of in this integrated whole. What we've got here in that James passage is that faith without works is dead. Faith is not faith unless we're acting on it. And we might say, well, I don't know if I can step out. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know what I'm... Guess what? By stepping out, you're showing that you have faith. By doing what needs to be done, what needs doing, we do it. We have Paul. And Paul, he is constantly trying to encourage people to be the way that they need to be. And he has these two young people, Timothy and Titus, in 2 Timothy 2, chapter 2, verse 4. He says this. I'm sorry. I got the wrong one. It must be 4:2. 4:2. Sorry, that's my second mistake of the day. 4:2. Preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. And so what we have here is that Paul says, you know what, there are times when faith is easy. There are times when the fields are white for harvest. There are times when it's easy. But you don't just do it then. You also do it when it is hard. You make sure that you are working to make sure that the gospel is preached, to make sure that God's ways are known to people around you. And I'm mindful of what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. It's one of my favorite passages. It says, by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you, I, Paul, who am quote-unquote timid when face-to-face with you, but quote-unquote bold when away. I beg you that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect to be towards some people who think that we live by the standards of this world. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. And this is an important lesson for every single one of us always to learn. The world may say, hey, you know what, we can go in this direction. That's not the direction that we need to be going in. The world may say, you know what, we can go ahead and be a little bit soft on this. We're not going to be. But what he says is the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Moving in the right way. The writer of Hebrews says it this way. In Hebrews chapter 10. And it's right before that great Hall of Fame of faith. But we're going to start in verse 32. Because the writer of Hebrews is writing to some people that have been faithful, who have been moving. And he says, remember that those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised for in just a very little while. He who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith, and if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. And so what we see in this Deuteronomy passage is we see people who will not shrink back from their given task. They're going to do what needs to be done. And we also need to be doing that. And we think about that, well, I'm not exactly sure if I'm all that strong. I'm not exactly sure that I have all that much influence. Like Gideon, you go into strength you have. You do what needs to be doing, what needs doing. And I think that working in little ways can open some pretty big doors. I don't know how we talk in our places of work. Maybe we are among a lot of unbelievers, and maybe they go through some difficult times. And maybe it's just a thing where we just say, well, you know, I'm a praying person, and I don't know if you are, but I'll be praying for you. I did that recently with a person who's going through a hard time at my school. I know that he's not a praying person, but I said it. And he said, I really do appreciate that. I'll take that. It's opening little cracks. It's opening little doors. It's when people see us going through difficult times for us to be able to say, you know what? It's been tough. But my God and my faith is getting me through. It's a crack that can lead to a big open door. How do we speak? How do we act? What do we say? Moving in faith in the right directions. And what we see is that God gives us security and shelter in our wake, wherever way we are going. He wants to bless us more than we can ask or imagine. He does these things for us because he loves us. And we too are part of the covenant. If you're not a Christian, it is our strong desire that you become one. And we do that by entering into the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in the waters of baptism and coming up a new creature. And if you've got questions about that and you want to explore that, we're willing to talk to you about that because maybe you have no idea what we're talking about. And so we're willing to talk about that and help you through that. But if you've made that decision this day to do that, we offer the invitation to come, and we can do that right now as we stand and sing.